Welcome to the Janelle King Show. I am Janelle King, and you're listening to Extra 106.3. If you're listening on the radio on a Saturday at 4 p.m. or encore episode at 9 a.m. But if you're watching on YouTube, welcome, welcome, welcome. We decided to add some video to these conversations, and we appreciate you to join. We appreciate you for joining. Oh my gosh. And I want you to like, share, and comment if you have something to say, as well as check out the podcast. The podcast will drop every Tuesday, and you can watch on the podcast park or listen on the podcast park, or you can listen anywhere where you get your podcast. So we are everywhere. Okay. So thank you so much for joining. This is part of my candid conversations, however you want to put it. And we're highlighting people in conversations under the Georgia Legislative Dome. And this is great. You know, we got so much going on. And I think that a lot of times we get caught up in national politics. We don't pay attention to local and people that represent who we are. So I am here to introduce individuals that are doing things, making strides, and really impacting your political space a lot more than you think. So right now, we have Representative Lauren Daniel with us, and I'm so excited to have her. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Now, like I said, I gave a brief background, but I want you to kind of go into your upbringing a little bit and just kind of give people who you are outside of the political space.
I always love these conversations because I think a lot of times politicians or public, I like to call us public servants, not politicians. But sometimes we're stuffy and you don't get to see who we are and why we step up to run in the first place. And so thank you for asking that. I have 4 beautiful children. I had my first child in high school, so my story is very different than most, being a teen mom and having that experience and, just overcoming that adversity. And I mean, it's taken me several years, but my husband and I, we've been together since we were in high school. And, we've kind of been involved in local politics for the better part of, 10, 15 years here. And so local politics definitely matter. And it's fundamentally formed who we are because we've been doing it since we were, old enough to vote.
How so? What was it like? Were you just kind of knocking on doors, and what were you doing?
So I feel like God has literally laid out our entire story. So my husband was actually the youngest elected official in the state at 19. He got elected to the Hampton City Council, which is, a small elected office, but nonetheless, he was 19 and it was a big deal at the time. And we've just had a passion for our local people and trying to help. But I think him getting into that so early, we were obviously knocking doors and campaigning for him. But then, it introduced us to a world of local politics, our local state reps and our senators and, really what they do. And so there was a natural flow there to jump on their campaigns and try and, help them get elected and reelected over the years. And, it's a natural progression.
Perfect. Now, I know that you are a Republican in the state house and wanted to find out what was your political journey or any milestones or key events that shaped your political beliefs.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting question on how our political beliefs are formed. I think it's really just common sense. Like, I think you look at the left today and there's just things that I fundamentally don't agree with. But when you think about, I don't know, I consider myself a common sense conservative. Like, what policies are we putting in place? How are we being fiscally responsible? What are we being, are we being, I don't know, reactionary? Are we being proactive? I think all that matters. But in terms of like the Republican Party and the platform, we're for opportunity, I think. And I think that's a big, I actually listened to a show that you had given. I don't know if it was recently. I listened to it recently, but you did a great job explaining the differences in terms of how Republicans vote and how Democrats vote. And we have a tendency to vote for what is, I don't want to say good for us, but, as individuals, what do you want as
Yeah,
an individual, and what's going to help your family?
right.
And, Democrats have a tendency to say, well, I think this might be good for everyone else.
Yeah.
But then if the majority votes for what they believe is going to be good for them and their families, your policy will be shaped by that. And
Right.
you will have that, that
Mhm.
breakdown. And so I think that's a perfect example of, you know, the
Yeah.
differences.
You know what's interesting? When I did that video, there was a slight part of me that felt almost like, should I not say that I'm thinking about the things that are concerning me or concerning my family? It's almost like we live in a society where they make you feel like you're doing something wrong if you are taking care of yourself. When in fact, we all know that you can't help others if you're not in a place of strength. And ultimately, if we come together and we all are voting for things and supporting policies that will directly impact us, we'll get a collective response. And so I got some good traction on that. And I hope more and more people understand where we're coming from when we say to focus in on those things that directly impact you. And that being said, you're working on legislation every single day. As we're recording this right now, Representative Daniel is in session. So we are great and we're grateful that she's able to kind of pull away. So can you share what are some insights or policy perspectives that you're working on or that is going on in the Dome as we speak?
Yeah, so I came in, I'm the youngest female on the Republican side, and I think that brings with it um, an an untapped market, if you will,
Yes.
especially when it comes to families. Like,
Yeah.
if you are not in the child rearing stage of your life, it's very difficult to understand what families are dealing with in today's society.
Mm,
And so I've tried to bring that perspective, if you will, with me up
mhm.
there. And I passed 1021, which is a increase in the child tax deduction. It took it from 3,000 to 4,000, and so that will be for every child in the state. And I think that's going to help families tremendously. We tried to focus on families this year. Maternal and infant health is also a huge topic that I have focused on and will continue to focus on this year. I dropped 3 pieces of legislation on that. It was 10, 36, 37, and 38. It was like a bundle. Um, and the maternal mortality issue is a big deal in Georgia. We know that. And infant mortality is not far behind it. And so dealing with those things, I think, super important. And as Republicans and as somebody who's pro-life, I think it's hand in hand.
Yeah.
And so I've really focused in on families this year. We've also passed, lowering the income tax rate, and we're trying to get it down. But do it in a responsible way. And that's a lot of people don't understand how the tax system works in Georgia, but we do have a constitutional requirement for a balanced budget. And so, would I like to get rid of the income tax? Sure. But how do we do that in a responsible way? And I think the governor has led in a great way on that. And we have continuously, year after year, continued to lower it, trying to get it as low as possible. So school choice is another big one. Some of the, like 233, that's the school vouchers that everybody, talks about in the news, but we've
Mhm.
also pushed other things regarding school choice and different scholarships. And, they're not all flashy, but I think ultimately, I personally would love to see universal school choice, something similar to how Florida operates. It's just overwhelmingly, whether you're Republican or Democrat, the polling has been done, and parents want to be able to make that choice for their kids. And so those are some issues. They all kind of have an underlying family tinge to them, I would say.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, because we all come up there with different backgrounds, with different strengths. And I think that is where I can shine at the moment.
You know what I love about where you are and what you're working on? I love that it's family focused. And most importantly, I love that you're a woman focusing on the family. A lot of times, particularly in politics, it's such a male-dominated industry, and it's almost like I feel like the women want to shy away from some of these lanes that we typically get thrown into simply because we're a woman. And I don't like that. I feel like if that's your strength and you understand it on a deep level, then you should put your energy and time behind that, and you should probably be more successful, which is what you're doing. And I just love that. Can we talk a little bit about the maternal mortality? Because this is a topic that I feel has been a little hijacked from the left side. And the way I hear it, and this is not to create a partisan battle or anything like that, because I think that there's conversations that have to happen on both sides. I don't think either has it all the way right when it comes to this. However, I hear it mostly on the left. So what is your message as it relates to maternal mortality compared to theirs? Because they typically talk about minorities and they keep the focus on diverse communities. But this is something that I think crosses across the board, correct?
It does. And so when I talk about maternal mortality, I hate when it's referred to as a bipartisan effort, because I feel like it should be a nonpartisan effort. And those are two different things. Small difference, but huge impact in terms of how we see it. And, earlier this session, I actually got up in the well and just directly affronted, we had Democrat reps get up there, and they were continuously, citing different statistics that did not necessarily align. They weren't accurate. And, I always try to explain to people the Maternal Review Committee is a great thing, but what Republicans actually put it in place about 12 years ago. And just about every piece of legislation over the last decade that has been passed and put into place on this issue has been led by Republicans. And so getting people to understand that, I think, has been difficult, because the messaging machine on the left is great. I'll give it to them. They're good at it.
Right.
But that doesn't change the facts. And so as somebody, I also had, terrible complications in my recent pregnancy. And so it is somewhat personal to me. Like, I recognize, if we're going to make it partisan, you're not helping anyone.
Yeah.
And so I got up in the well and basically just said that out loud and said, this is not a partisan issue. Quit making it one.
Yeah.
Because to answer your question, I think, on the left with this issue, they always turn back to Medicaid expansion. But my question is, does that prevent you from getting preeclampsia? Does that prevent you from having an embolism? Does that prevent you from having postpartum depression? The answer to that is no. Republicans actually expanded pregnancy Medicaid and to up to a year. And so that's already in place. Like, that's, as Republicans and people that are pro-life, we felt like that was the right thing to do. But it's interesting because no one ever talks about the efforts that have been made. And
right.
We'll see.
We have to. We got to see, but we have to show that. I didn't know that either. Everything you were just saying, I hadn't heard it. I didn't know. It almost felt like Republicans just wasn't talking about this at all, but you were passing policy.
Yes.
So the current policy you're working on, can you talk a little bit about that? And how do you, like, what policy can you associate to this particular issue that will have an effect? Because it almost feels like when it comes to your health, it's every person is so different that it's hard to create a policy that kind of encompasses everyone.
Yeah, so the three bills, and they're all maternal health related, but they touch on different aspects, is how I like to describe it. So the first made it through the House with 100% support, which is great. And what it did is it's going to create a maternal and infant health commission in the state. We have the review committee. So in order for me to explain this accurately, I'll have to explain what the review committee does. And so the Maternal Mortality Review Committee takes all of the medical records of the women who have died from either in pregnancy or up to a year after they give birth for any reason. Okay. So when we talk about the numbers in that report, it is important to differentiate because there are pregnancy related deaths. So those are your things that are directly related to pregnancy or giving birth. And then there are pregnancy associated deaths because these people gave birth, but that includes motor vehicle accidents, homicide, any reason. Okay. So when we're talking about the statistics, it's very important not to group those two together because they are different. You know, is it health related or is it just because you had, I mean, I had a child within the last year. If I got in an accident, God forbid, I would be counted. And
Really?
yes. And so when
Uh,
we talk about that report, we have to talk about it transparently. Now they've done wonderful things in terms of health and, you know, trying to compile information, but with that being said, we are only looking at the women who have died. And there are much, much more women who have had complications and have gotten very sick that survive, and their stories are not looked at in that review committee, essentially. And so this commission would seek to bring policymakers to the table because policymakers currently don't sit on the review committee either. So that is a substantial difference. That review committee it deals with medical records, so it is confidential in nature. So I understand that is that's intentional, but the
Are
commission,
they doctors that sit on there?
yeah,
Like, okay.
yes, and so there, I mean, it's a long list. It's
Okay.
several doctors, several research institutions like Emory Morehouse, that those the academics are on there. You know, different advocacy groups are on there, you know. So I mean, it's a conglomeration of people with different backgrounds.
Okay.
So the commission is different in that sense. It would seek to put policymakers at the table, and it would be open to the public. So the way our commissions work is our meetings and stuff happen where Georgians, we go around the state and Georgians come in and talk about it. And so I think, you know, this kind of goes back to the view of the majority in the legislature are men. It's no secret. And so getting policymakers to understand what people are dealing with, I think, is vitally important. And making sure people feel heard. And so just like you said, you know, I didn't know that Republicans have been working on this. They definitely have, and for over a decade, but it's not something that has been, you know, used as a messaging tool. And so to see that on the left is concerning and interesting, but we do have to do a better job to make sure that people know and women know that we're trying to help them. But the commission itself also encompasses infants.
Okay.
And that is not something that the Maternal Mortality Review Committee looks at. The most recent, when I pulled it up on DPH's website the other day, the most recent infant mortality report was like 2017. So I don't know, you know, I'm sure DPH keeps up with it, but there's not, you know, there's not a report or a committee, to my knowledge, that is over it. And so bringing policymakers to kind of get all of that encompassed, I think, is an exciting thing. And so it did pass out of the House. It's over on the Senate side. And so that's something I'll keep working on to make sure it comes to fruition. But
and the specific policy would be what?
Yeah, so the purpose of the commission actually is it has a sunset clause after 2 years. And so it would give us the ability to travel around the state, figure out, because similar to what you were talking about, different people have different experiences, different needs. Georgia is a really diverse state. It's also has different regions that need different things. So like, you know, rural Georgia is very different than the metro. And so they need different things. And so trying to figure out how to best make policy. And so the purpose of the commission is actually to put the people in the room that have the ability to make policy, to take all the information we're given, all the statistics we're given on this issue, and say, okay, this is what we can do going forward to touch individualized issues. So I always give the example, you know, when I gave birth last summer, I represent Henry County. We have somewhere over 250,000 people, and we have 12 birthing rooms in our hospital. Yeah. And so it's, after
Mm.
talking to OBs and nurses there,
Mhm.
it's not uncommon for women to end up giving birth in the ER or in the hallway
Wow.
because there's
Wow.
just not capacity. And so, again, that's something that a review committee wouldn't pick up on because you're not looking at the experiences. But
Yeah.
how many birthing rooms does the hospital have? Do they have, all that plays into
Mhm.
someone's outcome.
I love that you have, like when you mentioned the birthing rooms, because that's what I was looking for, is something that, so let's start here. When you mentioned it, what came to mind was, if I'm giving birth in the emergency room, or if I'm giving birth in the hallway, that could open me up to infections, just all kinds of things, because you're exposed, the baby's exposed, and it's just not the most conducive environment. I'm not a doctor, so this is all assumption and speculation, but but fixing something like that is something that I don't think people consider or even think that can play a role in helping to reduce some of those numbers. So when we look at the women that are being affected, one of the messaging I hear a lot is that Black women are disproportionately affected as it relates to maternal mortality. Is that what you're seeing in the commission, or is that something that's a little inflated, or like, how are you seeing it as it relates to the ethnic breakdown?
Yeah, so it is a little inflated, and
Mhm.
but it does disproportionately affect Black women. And so it's yes and no. And that goes back to how how many deaths are counted,
Mhm.
what deaths are counted. So if you include the the pregnancy associated deaths, so your motor vehicle accidents, your homicide, your domestic violence, if
Mhm.
you include those numbers, then you get an inflated
Got it.
number. Now,
Got
if
it.
you only take the health disparities, now that's about, I want to say the last time I looked at it, it affects Black women about 2.3% higher than
Mm.
other, other races. Now,
Wow.
a lot of the information that has been brought forth by medical providers and stuff is that there are risk factors,
Mhm.
and a lot of them are obesity, high blood pressure. A lot of these are pre-existing conditions that people come
Yeah.
in with,
Yeah.
and so having that, how do you affect policy? You have to put in place things that will help them be healthier, nutrition,
Yes. Yes.
teach
You know,
nutrition.
you know what? Okay. Whenever this conversation comes up, the thing that I say, particularly as a Black woman, some of the things that I have experienced, and I haven't given birth, so I don't know that, but I've had some medical challenges, which is why I haven't given birth. However, that being said, there's elements in our community that I don't think is being considered, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. But there's women that choose to give birth at home, and they have doulas, and they don't go and do the medical route. Or if they do get to the hospital, sometimes it's just too late because, again, they chose to give birth at home. And that's something that's very common in my community, as well as, to your point, these underlying conditions of just not knowing how to eat better, how to eat healthier, living in food deserts where they don't have access to produce, stuff like that. And I don't hear that conversation enough. It's mostly almost, it's somebody else's fault, but that's something that we all can do and we can push within the community. So I'm glad that came up. The 1 year. So you said that tracks, after giving birth up until 1 year.
Mhm.
Is that only if there were, let's say there was complications or something that happened during birth? So now we're watching, or let's say I gave birth and everything was totally fine, and 6 months later I'm fine, but then 9 months later something happens. How do you determine if it's related to giving birth or just another medical condition?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful, wonderful question, and not one that I am qualified to answer.
Okay.
So I can tell you how the review committee does it, and their methodology is in their report that they release. And so yes, that happens, but no, it is not specific to women who have had complications. So this is anyone who has given birth,
Mhm.
and dies within a year. Now, the CDC actually recommends that you keep track, and that this is another thing. So when we compare Georgia to other states, it's important to remember, even though our maternal mortality rate is low on the totem pole, it's gotten better, but the caveat here is the CDC recommends that you count it for 42 days after birth. And so Georgia has taken on this issue because we want to fix it, but we've also expanded our scope of what we count. And not every state does that. So when you're comparing to states, it's important that you compare to a state that counts it this similar to how we do. So that's important to remember. But the way the review committee operates is that it's any woman who dies after giving birth within a year.
Okay. So now moving into some political affairs topics, because I have to ask you your thoughts on some of the things that are pressing on a federal level, or I say a national level, like the border. And, God bless the family of Laken. I think it was Riley Laken, who passed away recently due to, at the hands of an illegal immigrant who was here in the country illegally. And so what are your thoughts on the border as someone who is a public servant and working in the community and have a direct connection to your constituents?
Yeah, so obviously it's a super important issue for people right now. And it was something that I actually signed on to 2 bills prior to Laken's death that I thought were important. One, I think, hold on, let me see. I think I have it over here. It's hard to remember these numbers. 1102. We passed 1105 last night, but 1102 was one I signed on to, and it was titled the Sanctuary Deportation Act. And essentially what it would have done, because it didn't get out of the House last night, but there's still days left, and tacking on stuff can happen. But that piece of legislation essentially is if you were arrested in the state and you were here illegally, that you would be sent somewhere to a sanctuary state, that you wouldn't be staying in Georgia after you committed a crime. We're not going to put you back into our state population. So that we're having to be very creative, because obviously we can't control the border. We did support the governor in his efforts to send our national troops to the border recently, which is great. We've been doing that for several years, I believe, since 2019. And but we are limited. I mean, the federal government they're not serious about it. I mean, the president could literally close it tomorrow if he chose to. And it's it's this argument of whether Congress is doing it. It's a mess in Washington. So, but at the state level, we are trying to be creative in how we handle it. And so that's one of them. I also signed on to one of Houston Gaines's bills. He represents the Athens area. And again, this was something that we did before this tragedy took place. And it was 1359. And essentially what it would do is it would provide a refund to homeowners in the area if on their property taxes, if they became a sanctuary city or a sanctuary county, because it decreases your home value. People don't want to live in a community that's not safe. And so it's interesting at the state level trying to combat this, but we are doing it. Like I said, 1105 last night passed. It was Representative Petrie's bill, and we're going to try and hold sheriffs accountable. A lot of our law enforcement officers do the best they can. They're doing a great job, but there are, in the same way there are bad actor DAs, there are also bad actor, where they don't report these things. They don't report that this person's here illegally and there's no follow-up. So we put that into place last night.
It's actually really cool to hear about policies on such a local level, in reference to a major issue that's happening on a national level. Because and this is why I love local politics, right? Because I would have never thought about the property values decreasing due to sanctuary cities. Like, that's something that is so localized, but I'm glad that policy is being made. And so that leads into my next conversation around just some of let's talk about your political career as a whole, and just being a young elected official. The reason why this is important is because, and this is to the viewers and listeners, if you ever meet Representative Daniel, it's not going to be a shock to, don't allow it to be a shock if you see her sweet baby strapped to her chest. And I love seeing it. I love the pictures, because one of the things that's concerning to me is that we're not giving an image of what the House and the Senate and just our elected officials can be or look like to our younger people. It almost feels like this is a job that you can do only when you are over 60 or over, and you're in more of your retirement years rather in your building years. But you're showing that it can be done in your building years as a wife, as a mother, and as a young woman. So what do you think we need to do under the dome in order to attract younger people to run for office?
Yeah, so I love that you mentioned that. I have my son with me most days, and it's twofold. I believe, one, it's what's best for him. I mean, he was premature by almost 2 months, and so having him with me, having the ability to nurse him, I was told by a doctor, like, if you can keep him as close to you as possible, if you can nurse him, he will be better off. And so, I had to make a decision. Whether or not, I was going to bring him with me. And I chose to bring him with me. The speaker was very supportive. My colleagues are supportive. They love him to death. And so it's been this stark, image that people have really gravitated towards. But it's a bigger than just an image. Like it's what moms are doing all over. Like this idea culturally that moms can't be, in the workplace and doing things and raising their family. Like you don't have to choose. And I think that's one of the biggest footholds in the pro-life discussion that the left has won. Like you can't raise a family and accomplish things, that you have to sacrifice one.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that. I mean, you look at, the Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, I think she has like 7 or 8 kids. Like, it's just, if we're going to be a pro-family party, this is what it looks like. And I've had other women reach out and say, oh, I didn't even know. I didn't know that, I never even thought about the importance of doing this at a younger age. And it is important. I mean, it is. How do you relate to people when you're retired that are having kids? Like you're just not in that stage.
Right. Or you kind of forget, right? You know what? This is something that I think is another hijacking, right? So, the whole conversation, the whole feminist movement almost is acting as if, having a woman that is able to take care of home and make sure that the home is strong as well as is known in the city, as if that's something that is a feminist thing, when in fact, it's a very traditional value, actually. It's really traditional, which is how conservative women typically lead. And the reason why I say that is because, we're typically very spiritual. And if you read in Proverbs about the virtuous woman, she wasn't just taking care of the home. The home was obviously in place, but at the same time, it talks about her being in the marketplace, and going out and buying and selling land and real estate. So to your point, it is a very traditional value, and it's a very conservative value to be able to manage both in a successful way. And I just commend you because you're doing it, and I love it. I love to see it, and I'm pushing it. So we're gonna keep doing that. So before we get into our final segment, which is gonna be really quick, which is our Would You Rather quick fire segment. That's fun and lighthearted. I just want to see if you can leave us with some advice just based off of your personal experiences to individuals who are considering running for office, who are in those building years rather in the retirement years. How do you prep and plan for this type of role?
Yeah, so there's a lot of time management that goes into this, and making sure that you have support. Like my husband is super supportive. I couldn't do it without him, and I think that makes all the difference. To say that I could do this alone, wouldn't be fair. And I have a great support system spiritually behind me too. Like I'm really close with my pastor, and just I have people that are constantly praying for me. So I think that's the foundation for first and foremost.
Yes.
But for women, even young men, I would say, like the Republican Party is looking to grow, and young people I mean, I know a lot of young Republicans. but how do you balance? I mean, how do you balance everything? And I would say that the number one piece of advice that I would give to a young person looking to run for office is to get involved with your local people that are already there,
Mhm.
figure out where you can add value, and just be yourself. I
Yeah.
think people are looking for people that are authentic.
Yes.
And I was, I mean, just quite honestly, like I was hit on being young when I ran in my primary,
Mhm.
and it's interesting because I believe that people are looking for new and fresh ideas and want to be hopeful. We don't want more of the same.
Right.
And so really I would just encourage people to step out and say, hey, we are the future. I mean,
Yeah.
it's I'm almost 30. Like, yes, I'm young, but I'm almost 30. Like, this
Right.
idea that, we
Right.
shouldn't be running at this age is fascinating to me. But I mean, it does exist. You be prepared that you might get hit on it, but just be steadfast and know that you know what you're talking about, you know what you're doing, and that you have something to offer.
You know what? Jesus went into ministry at 30. So I think about that. I think about the fact that most of our founding fathers were in their early 20s when they were writing the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and everything else. We honestly, the country has been run by younger people from the beginning of time. And so we've gotten older over time. And that's not to say that if you are older that you can't lead, because I personally think that it's more about maturity when you're younger and cognitive ability as you get older. And if those things are intact, then you should be able to offer yourself as a public servant. So
Right.
I think that is great. And I appreciate you sharing that advice. So let's get into our fun segment, which is our Would You Rather. And the Would You Rather segment is one of those discussions where you cannot give an explanation.
Oh,
So
no.
just to answer the question, and it's a little political, but mostly just kind of fun. So first, would you rather have the power to unilaterally pass one major policy of your choice or successfully collaborate with the opposing party on multiple smaller policies?
Mm. Can I get clarification?
Okay,
Currently or
so
overall?
I know. So I will say overall, right? Overall, would you rather pass just one, if you could just pass one major policy that's on your heart, or you can pass several policies, but you have to work collaboratively with the opposing side?
Mm. I would probably work with the other side. I think the more good. Well, you said no
I
explanations.
know. I love that. I love that though. I thought about doing different questions and different interviews, but
Mhm.
it's actually fun because I got a different answer than the other one. Okay. Would you rather have dinner with a past president or a past chief of staff?
Past chief of staff.
If you had to have a professional sidekick, would you rather that professional sidekick or that professional executive that's assistant that's working with you? Would you rather they have telepathic abilities where they know your every thought, or they had the ability to kind of shapeshift and be able to seamlessly adapt into any environment and any role that you need them to?
I would rather them know what I'm thinking and what I need.
Cool. All right. And lastly, in the realm of multitasking, would you rather be an expert at juggling numerous projects simultaneously or have the superhuman ability to hyper focus on one task at a time with unparalleled efficiency?
One task at a time with unparalleled efficiency.
Love it, love it, love it. All right. Well, we're going to close this with you giving us your last thoughts. Is there anything you would like to share, anything you're working on, as well as how we can follow you and find you on social media?
Yes. So we talked a lot about maternal health, and there is another piece of maternal health legislation I'm really hopeful for. Actually, there's two. I want to close with two. One is maternal health and one is local. And I think that's important to mention too. The maternal health one is actually maternal and infant health education effort. And so a lot of what we do in the legislature is reactionary. This effort would be a first of its kind that would be proactive. And I'm really excited about it. I hope we can get it through. What it does is it would take 9th through 12th graders and teach them human development. So how a baby develops through pregnancy and the comorbid conditions that we see that are killing women and the correlation between the two. And so it would address infant mortality and maternal mortality in an effort to. And so that is something I think will fundamentally save lives. Is it immediate? Probably not. But can we give people, knowledge is power. Can we give them the knowledge to save their lives? And so that's a big on taking. And then I have something called Addie's Law. I don't know if you saw in the news lately, we had a young girl, 8-year-old little girl, trying to get on her school bus, and she was hit and killed. Oh. That happened in the district that I represent, and I have worked very closely with her mother and introduced legislation that increases the penalties for passing a school bus. I mean, it's unbelievable. Thousands and thousands of people pass them every day when the arms are out. Wow. And so that is a huge undertaking that I'm trying to take on, and something that's very serious and can move along. And then on a lighter note, how you can find me, just about everything is Lauren Daniel for Georgia. You should be able to find me that way. It's, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. Twitter's a little different than, Facebook and Instagram. And so every now and then, you'll get some pushback out of Twitter that you won't see on the other ones, which is fun. But yes, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and then obviously, you can find me on my website if you want to reach out personally.
Perfect. All right. Well, I love it. Thank you so much for doing this. I look forward to seeing you again at the end of March for our women's event. And having this conversation just further excites me for what you're going to share when you're talking to the young girls. So thank you so much. And that's it. That includes the interview. To everyone who is listening, make sure you like, share, and comment if you're watching. And make sure you follow me. You can always go to allthingsjking.com to listen to past episodes. This video will be uploaded there as well. And then we'll stay tuned.